The saddest part of the story was the children. What I was hearing from others painted an ill-fated tableau. Being a mere male, I might be forced to lose everything, including my children, to the Jehovah's Witnesses. However, because Magda had the tendency to diligently alienate them against me, and because later she initially left them with me, shouting before leaving, "You are all from the seed of this evil man, and you stay with him," custody of the children might be granted to me. This is a story worth mentioning, for I had to find ways to make life as happy for them as possible. I also needed to be ready for possible developments when finally discovering the irreparable damage done to their minds during our last few days as a family unit, when she succeeded in completely turning them against me long before her supposed visit to Hobart. After our initial separation, and now living in a rented unit in Elwood, children being enrolled in a local primary school, I frequented the city as often as I could, while doing the shopping for the whole week, when I did not have any academic assignments. Many weeks later I began meeting Andrea and other friends. I kept practicing music with Ross, David, and others at the home of one of them. And whenever I took the children there, they thoroughly enjoyed themselves. When it was a birthday celebration, some of my friends apparently approached local Salvation Army. Normally they would provide little gifts for the needy, but they delivered a few birthday gifts for the girls, thus surprising us all. It made one think that the world was not full of doom and gloom. How wonderful it was to be surrounded by such caring people, but I have not been able to discover who contacted the Salvos initially. I still wonder who it was considering me as being desperately needy, but probably my miserable and tired looks were interpreted that way. Remember, my daughters had never enjoyed any birthday celebrations until then, and at first were understandably very apprehensive due to what they had been indoctrinated with, but soon they were thoroughly enjoying their special days with a few of their new friends. The first time ever being able to blow those tiny candles, first time ever having a happy birthday song, first time ever receiving birthday cards, and little gifts from friends made them feel very special. However, I cannot deny the fact that the specialized psychoanalysis I discreetly conducted showed me the unconscious programming by Jehovah's Witnesses which would eventually come to the fore with my daughters in their future lives, when they would only support their mother's ways or be completely confused about everything. They were once their mother's sweethearts, and years later my second daughter proved me to be absolutely correct. However, when they were happy, I always felt fulfilled. Following one first-time ever birthday party organized for Birgit when we were visiting my friend Mike, where his other friends were also gathered in South Yarra for the occasion, she was very shy but also clearly very happy, as she had never experienced anything like that until then. Everyone wishing her a very happy birthday, but one could easily see how worried she was deep down in case she might be sinning, as Magda's indoctrination. In reality, I never belittled or denied the wishes of my once-upon-a-time wife. However, while we lived together, I have never seen the children really happy. My intention was to let them live as children, because they were indeed growing up very quickly. I suffered great stress within my own personal space, which could quickly send one to the grave, and contemplated how important it was to be able to talk to someone willing to listen. In that regard, Magda was lucky, for she could at least talk to other witnesses. I, on the other hand, had no one to turn to, and could not share my concerns with my beloved children. Alas, they sometimes noticed me silently crying in a dark corner. One of the girls would come to me asking why I was sad, and both would enquire if something was hurting me. I would give them a little hug, telling them not to worry, I'm fine now, and they would make some hot tea and bring it to me. Although unexpected, it really meant a lot. Just imagine how I felt. Sometimes they attempted to make Greek coffee as I had once taught them, marvelously surprising me. But children are children, and they would do the same for their mother. You might be familiar with Fyodor Dostoevsky's words, where he says, "Only the heart knows how to find what is precious." Another time, both sisters prepared a very unusual sandwich. I would normally consume what they offered, but some things were a little over the border. They toasted slices of bread, put the thickest amount of butter one could imagine, and a generous amount of peanut butter on the top, a certain amount of Vegemite, the Australian yeast extract, some honey, and sardines. It was a great effort on their part, as they so proudly brought it to my breakfast table while I was looking into my music scores in the morning. If I ate their masterpiece, it would make me very ill, and if I rejected it, they would feel sad, so I suggested sharing it with them, and waited until they had a little taste. Both girls shouted, "Dad, Dad, don't eat it, it's yucky." One needed to explain to them, in a colorful way, how to make sandwiches really yummy. I believe that they enjoyed the experience and gradually became very inventive, but their interest in McDonald's food remained their number one choice. Personally, I always preferred home-cooked food, and not the fast foods one finds on every street corner. Both girls, however, were keen about nutritionally deficient types of food. That may be due to peer pressure at school, because Magda was keenly interested in a balanced diet. In our happier days, we looked into the subject of eating right and living healthily, attending lectures on proper nutrition for healthy and longer lives. One such lecture was conducted by an American nutritionist, Leylord Cordell, after recommendation by Ruth Schrober, and we even purchased his book he was promoting at Melbourne Town Hall. He looked younger than his age. I believe that if we altered our thought patterns to be more positive and consider a nutritional and balanced diet as well as a regular exercise regime, we could remain agile, alert, and young, living a lot longer than the average human life expectancy. However, we have also been criticized for our interest in such trivial concepts, due to their generous God having promised He was going to make every witness young again in the new world. At this troublesome time of my existence, as I repeat my words, I was spending time in the city during school hours when I did not lecture, because I needed to be with other people in order to forget my misery, and so I often met Andrea and my other friends. A while ago, and for the first time ever, she visited me. What a joy it was to be visited by one of my friends for a change. Unfortunately, I can never forget her very first visit. I was happy when she came to our place in the evening, during Magda's obviously pretend holiday in Hobart, and in the morning I was intending to draw her image before she went home. Since it was very late and there was no transport other than taxis, knowing the nature of life that existed at night on the streets, it would be unethical and unwise to send her or anybody into possible danger. Her staying at our place was not for the usually expected relationship. Logically, it was important to consider the children as well. I certainly did not expect Magda to drop in like a bomb, although our marriage was already broken beyond repair. Nonetheless, I was really so happy for what Magda did after spying on me, no matter how illegal it was on her part, justified in her beloved brother's eyes. For them, I was expected to be unfaithful to my marital partner as a disfellowshipped unbeliever. In this game, we were playing certain roles. They always had to be right, and I had to be the rejected of God. Interestingly, when my daughters met Andrea, they were very amicable. Perhaps they realized that there was nothing going on between us other than being good friends. We were hearing all kinds of nasty stories about people being insulted, abducted, and abused at night, and therefore her staying overnight was justified. But when Magda arrived in the morning with one of her elders from their kingdom hall or their self-made judicial committee, they were even more eager to judge me with further sins. Magda's shouting at the children to stay with their father, the great sinner, because they were from his seed, and leaving with her so-called brother was taken as a sign of no return. The girls chose to stay with me, and their mother left them on her own accord. However, I cannot forget that fateful moment when Magda saw Andrea and shouted, "See, my brother, just as I told you before, he is the evil man. He is not faithful to me, and he was committing fornication outside our marriage. He is really gone evil." I was shocked, and so were the children. Andrea was sitting opposite me, and Annette, wanting to see what I was drawing, walked to the back of my chair. Magda grabbed Claude's arm like a giant hook, further shouting, "You are all really, really evil. You are so low. See, brother, see this? There is another woman in my home, and she must have slept in my bed and in his arms. She's a bad, bad whore." She obviously conveniently forgot that we had a spare room. It was very sad to see how Claude was trying to free his arm and shoulder from her grip, wanting to run to his dad. "I want to go to my dad. I want to go to my dad," he shouted. Magda, in her uncontrolled anger, slapped him hard on the head, thus making us all feel heartbroken, and shouted, "Come, Claude! I told you, you are coming with Mummy." yelling at the girls. "This is your last chance. You can still come with us or stay with the evil and rot." One was clinging to Andrea, and the other hiding behind me, crying and shouting, "We don't want to go. Please, please don't let me go. Don't let me go." It was shocking and terrible to see how the children were trembling in absolute fear. "I'm staying with Dad," shouted Birgit. "I'm staying with Dad too," shouted Annette. "You are all so very, very evil," shouted Magda. "You cannot see what an evil man he is." The well-dressed brother put his arms around Magda's shoulders, tenderly hugging her, while she dragged Claude across the floor, looking in our direction while talking to her, and said, "Let us go peacefully to my place." Then he asked if she needed to pick up anything. Magda did not want anything, and shouted again, "Stay with this the evil man. You are all from his seed. He can look after you from now on with his new whore. You can all rot in hell." Andrea was extremely shocked, tears rolling down her cheeks. After Magda had left with Claude and her boyfriend, or brother, the girls cried for a long time while Andrea and I tried to calm them. They were really frightened and constantly asked me, "Please, Dad, don't let us go. You will not let us go, will you, Dad?" It was not easy to calm them down, and I needed to make some important plans quickly. Andrea asked me if it was all right for her to stay and help us with things, especially with the girls' needs. But although I appreciated the help offered, I could not subject her to such a mess. I was going to see her again a few days later, as I needed to overcome the trauma we had been subjected to. Even at night, it was devastating to see the children trembling with fear, waking up and coming to the lounge to sit with me, listening to light music. But at least it helped them to calm down. I wished the utter fear and inevitable shock they experienced had never happened. It would take a while before they could be reasonably calmed and accept that it was their mother's choice to leave. I explained to them as clearly as I could that their mother did not leave them because she hated them, but rather because she was not happy with me, and that sometimes adults had problems with each other. At that stage, I had not developed any serious relationship with anybody outside my dreamt of marriage, not even with Andrea. "But, Dad," said Annette, "you know, I don't think Mommy loved you ever." That was very sad. I could not contain myself, and cried, whilst trying not to show my tears. Instead, I occupied them with more fun things, preparing healthy desserts and snacks. I took them to the parks and city, purchased new clothing, and frequented the movies over the next few days. They appeared reasonably calmed, and it was clearly evident that they did not want to live a life of restrictions, strict cultist rules and regulations any longer, but deep inside I suffered in silence. They wanted to live like all other children, and because they would soon grow up, I only hoped that this separation had not caused much trauma and angst in their lives, although time is said to be a great healer. I wished the children had never experienced something like this, separated from each other. Claude was no longer with us, and I missed him badly. What an awful tragedy it must have been for the young boy. I could easily imagine him asking his mother when they were going to go back home, or wanting to see his dad. I was certain that Magda instructing him never to mention his father, perhaps insistently saying, "You are not going to see him ever," or constantly repeating, "Your father is evil," even trying to convince him, as she had previously tried with our daughters. "He is dead." None of these thoughts might be entirely true, but the possibility, and in fact the reality of her disciplining them in this self-styled format, while trying to turn them utterly against their father, was very real. She proved herself to be very cunning, making herself appear correct in all her assumptions concerning me by turning the children against what I stood for. Hopefully, the family court would take that into account. Perhaps they knew that she rejected the idea of becoming an Australian citizen to avoid certain duties the government of Australia expected of all its citizens. I am still doubtful whether she actually went to Hobart, most definitely following the dictates and wisdom of her Jehovah's Witness brothers. In fact, I am convinced that she stayed with them in order to spy on me, because I was not in their truth, and had never been so. She expected me to be a very wicked person no one could trust. In her eyes, I was as good as dead, because apparently their God hated sinners like me, and would not grant everlasting life, according to their interpretation of the Bible. In line with her character, I believe she wished I was dead anyway. She was unable to see that I was different and not wicked, for I always wished everybody to be happy, healthy, and live long lives. Maybe she needed to remember that, according to her Bible, God loved the world. If her husband, whom she treated like a worthless criminal all along, behaving like a determined disciplinarian towards him, was such a bad person, how could a logical woman, as she considered herself to be, so easily leave her children with him when she went to Hobart, and later left him permanently? That alone was a lie. Remember, as they so proudly preach, they never tell lies. Let us not forget that the witnesses only support their kind when something works for them. For instance, married couples are only praised as long as both parties are in their truth. And if one of them is found to be guilty of not following the rules and regulations laid down by their elders as Bible truths, they do everything possible to break that relationship. Any excuse will do. But we don't separate them. Once more, I'm going to repeat myself on what they preach. What God had put together, no man should put asunder. They need to be reminded that they are also asked to follow the rule of not judging others, just as Jesus advises them to take the big mote from their eyes before attempting to remove the tiny splinter in their brothers. I knew those so-called God-loving people were ever ready to hurt me in whatever way they could, and it became more evident through Magda's unique behavior towards me. Remember also that they consider themselves as being the only righteous people in the world. Having moved to Elwood a long time after our first family court hearing, their mother made her way to the same suburb, living in Spray Street. We continued to abide by the legal decision. Carl Sandburg writes, "Life is like an onion. You peel it off one layer at a time, and sometimes you weep." Having to attend to too many court hearings was not a very welcome state of affairs, and as I have mentioned before, the mid to late 1970s were not very favorable for me or my so-called family. I also knew that Magda was under enormous pressure, probably experiencing states of confusion due to her sole reliance on the witnesses with their limited wisdom, as they themselves admit, following their dictates to the letter. for, after all, she was a dedicated member of God's chosen. My going through confusion and fear, however, was not due to belonging to an evil world, as they loosely claimed, and their God was to destroy everything belonging to that world, which was under the control of the devil's leadership. It was due to being, for the first time, free to live with my dearest children, without having to put up with any interference from the witnesses. Some of the friends I had recently met suggested that I should seek the assistance of solicitors, and could even apply for help in finding one through the legal aid system, for they would help those who needed financial assistance. Several interviews later, I decided to do everything which needed to be done legally, although many months passed without any sign of Magda and my son Claude. At first she moved to one of the western suburbs of Melbourne, under the close supervision of her faithful brothers and sisters. Much later, she moved closer to where I lived. I needed to sell my property in Brighton at a reasonably cheap price, for it was becoming far too much to worry about, along with the memory of the past with Magda, who was never happy about any of my decisions since our settling in Melbourne, preferring not to be materialistic. The money from the sale of that property helped us settle elsewhere and provide for the girls' educational needs. It also paid part of my other property in Toorak by the Yarra before I decided to turn it into rental housing. When we were reasonably happy with each other, long before Jehovah's Witnesses declared me disfellowshipped, we visited some of my friends who were renting the Brighton property from me. Some of my activities I had to keep secret. I simply had to, because one day I could lose everything I considered being important, but if something like that eventuated, I was sure I could regain my losses by further hard work or exhibitions of paintings. My exhibitions had to be held not only within Australia, but also in overseas countries, like France and Germany. On the other hand, I can still not forget how, when visiting friends, she never desired to be social with any of them, for they were not in the truth. To be pleasing for her, all my friends had to be in the truth, otherwise she felt uneasy. Any issues in regard to property and finances had no importance for her, as all those material things belonged to a materialistic world, as she believed, and she was not part of it. She was in the truth, and her brain, as she claimed, was washed clean from the dross of the world. On occasion I had minor hiccups with my income due to rentals not being paid on time, forcing me to consider other part-time occupations to meet my financial needs. I was then considered a very materialistic person by the witnesses, and lectured to about the benefits of becoming a little more spiritual. For Magda, I was apparently drifting from the truth, or I was a big liar. She never made any effort to get to know me better, and I remained secretive towards all Jehovah's Witnesses, including my supposed wife. As far as they were concerned, this became my new title, a big liar. No doubt they were describing themselves by using those specialized names. The children's education, welfare, and my own livelihood was of prime importance. Therefore it was very hard to comprehend the witness philosophy of avoiding materialistic endeavors allegedly to please God. One thing was certain, that they needed slaves to do their bidding in the name of God's kingdom. On the other hand, many amongst them pretend to adhere to the wisdom which declares that God helps those who help themselves. Renting a house while having an investment property may sound very unusual, but when it comes to creating an income from a property, it was not a bad idea or useless investment. Yet I always preferred, as I do now, to remain very private, and found it was better in the long run. In fact, by living this way, which had been forced upon me, I became more and more secretive towards people, especially in the presence of Jehovah's Witnesses. So far, I have not discovered even one single individual amongst them who would listen or attempt to understand me, knowing that with their attitude to others, including their own kind, they always regard themselves above everybody else. Without being prejudicial, one can easily consider them as supremely separatist. We must also remember that my case was not unique, for multitudes of people have suffered the same fate due to the witnesses' shunning policies. As the months rolled by, the children continually attended Elwood Primary and were content. They had many good friends, and their families were trustworthy and supportive. Personally, what I discovered was that the area was more civilized than those of the western suburbs at the time. Children were more carefree than where we had been living previously. The girls certainly enjoyed sleeping in their own bedrooms, wherein I created a fairy tale storybook scene. I created fairy world furniture for their usage. Even the walls and ceilings were painted, displaying story characters. It was like a door opening into a fairyland, and hopefully they enjoyed it. But would they learn something from it? And would they remember it fondly? Did they really appreciate it at all? In their spare time, they were keenly interested in sharing song and dance activities, often with Young Talent Time, which was regularly aired on television for the young and young at heart. We used to frequent the studios in Richmond. Once I discovered Birgit sitting under the stairs at home and singing by herself. It sounded very beautiful. A few people passing by made an extra effort to tell us that this gorgeous voice needed to be heard by everybody, and I believe this encouraged her to learn song and dance. At the time, the Young Talent Time School was advertising vacancies for students with an opportunity to appear on television. We took advantage of the opportunity. Annette also wanted to be a part of this program. On a weekly basis, I took them to the Richmond School to practice. However, Annette was more interested in the theatrics of it. This colorful activity provided a change for the girls. During this time, I felt the need to apply for a divorce, for I knew Magda would feel happier without me. But I did not want her to simply disappear after she left, as she did previously, as encouraged to do. Unfortunately, during those days of extreme hatred directed at me by the Jehovah's Witnesses, after my disfellowshipment, when I needed to keep away, working overtime, creating all kinds of excuses not to come home, and at times walking the streets all night, and then going to work early in the morning, I felt completely rejected. The children later told me about their mother physically abusing them, convinced that she needed to discipline them in the harshest way possible. She was apparently telling them that she was doing what their father should have done in the first place. If true, she obviously did not realize that I would never discipline children by abusing them, as she did, breaking wooden spoons on their buttocks. Nor would I ever send them to bed hungry, because they did not pray to Jehovah. That is what Magda wanted me to do, but I was not Magda. When they were given time, without having to worry about Jehovah worship, they were happy, behaving like normal youngsters without being restricted from associating with others in the neighborhood and at school. As all our neighbors, associates, and friends witnessed, the children were happier without those restrictions. As mentioned before, while we were still together, every time they came home from school, Magda subjected them to lengthy interrogation sessions to admit their sins, and then they were chastised and forced to pray, asking Jehovah's forgiveness. If they did not do so, or laughed for some minor issue, they would be severely punished and denied any dinner. It was now over, and everybody other than the witnesses knew that they were enjoying their childhood nonsense better when they were away from their mother and her dearest associates. They told me all about Mom demanding to tell her if they had this or that other food she did not want them to have, punishing them by not giving them any food. I did not know of how much they were telling me was absolutely correct. However, I knew for certain that if they did not eat the food she prepared for them, she would put it aside even for several days, and before they could have freshly prepared food, they were forced to eat the previous meal first. This went on almost on a daily basis when they were living with their mother, and I was not around. When I was around and such treatment occurred, I would oppose her decision. I preferred to give them fresh food, while encouraging them to try the other one, just to please their mother. But in return she would resort to punishing me with her harshest critique. She took my attitude as not being respectful. In short, she treated me like an errant toddler. When Magda supposedly went to Hobart, I wondered whether she was going to stay with her beloved brother Siegfried, perhaps sharing the same spoonful of sesame seeds and honey for breakfast. However, this time it was doubtful, but her choosing just to spy on me in case I became unfaithful was the reality. Here I am repeating myself. That wretched moment is etched in my memory when she took poor Claude with her, clinging unto him as if he was her puppy on a leash. When her allegedly faithful brothers complained about me bringing a strange woman home, while I was intending to draw a portrait of Andrea after breakfast, Magda stormed in with a well-dressed man, who was certainly a witness. Unfortunately, these memories kept repeating for a while, just like undigested food, rising up through the esophagus and creating a very acidic taste in one's throat. Why she initially spied on me, as I theorize, was due to being advised by her supposedly faithful brothers to be careful that I would not abduct her precious possessions, namely her children, and disappear. In actuality, she did what she wrongfully expected of me. It was fascinating to see how that faithful brother Magda stormed in with completely ignored me as if I did not exist. I recall how Annette shouted, "Even if you hit me, I will still not come with you. I will not," while Birgit kept screaming. Magda's once-upon-a-time sweethearts, who always chose her, were now yelling at her. Sadly, this sudden shock they experienced probably made them do the unthinkable. From that moment, not seeing Magda and Claude for many months was not helpful, yet I was happy to sacrifice my valuable time to look after the needs of my daughters, I was their father and became their mother for a very long time. I did so happily and proudly, hoping that maybe one day they would appreciate me with what I had given up, so that they could be healthy and happy. Disturbingly, they were unable to see their mother during this period, and I was glad that I decided to move to Elwood, where I decorated the unit. Any child or adult visiting us would think they were entering a fantasy world with all the characters and color of storybooks, just the way I hoped it would. During the summer and weekends, we often went to Elwood or St. Kilda beaches and encountered many friends. One such friend was a tram conductor and fitness fanatic. In fact, I had once produced a documentary video about life on trams featuring him as a conductor and as a driver. Everybody who saw the documentary was very happy with it and wanted to see it again. Sometimes we just wanted to enjoy the sunrise at the beach. Occasionally we met a few police officers there, curiously asking what an adult with two young girls were doing at such an early hour of the day. Before they even asked, I wrote my details on a piece of paper and gave it to them, explaining the reasons for visiting the beach so early. It was very sad that they felt the need to question us because of current human trends, and it was sad to see where the world was at this time. Occasionally we invited them to our home if they happened to have a break, and share a cup of coffee with us. I believe making friends from all parts of the community is important. The girls really enjoyed going out very early, especially in the summer months, when it could get very hot during the day. On the other hand, they used to enjoy my keyboard playing and loved singing with me. I am immensely happy about having recorded many such sessions with them and loved every moment of playing the keyboards. Those recordings were made either on video, film, or reel-to-reel tapes, professionally, to retain the quality, and I still value them as wonderful gifts of life. I have even preserved my children's school exercise books, artwork, and other school-related assignments, and lots of pictures. Even after all these years, I still appreciate them dearly. I purchased a new home as a rental property to bring in some income for the upkeep of the family, with the option that probably the children could be housed in it at some future time. But once again, nothing about this could be said to anyone who was bent only on pleasing their God by becoming unmaterialistic. The unit we lived in was more than sufficient for our needs, and their school was close by. Admittedly, I did not know where Magda was for a long time, and most unusually, the girls never asked anything about her, although I tried to encourage them to think about her, but could not interest them. Maybe I was wrong thinking this way, and so decided to invent stories, telling them that everybody around the world had a loving mother, and that their mother also loved them, and perhaps one day, when she was ready, they would meet her again. Alas, that day remained a distant dream. Annette told me, "I think Mom has left us for good. I think she loves those other people better. They are her friends anyway." Birgit repeated, "I forgot how Mom looks now. I don't worry about her very much, but I want to see Claude." Often they told me things like, "Mom doesn't love us anymore." How could one respond to this? Would it not be wonderful if the family had not been broken by people supervising their mother's every move? My task to keep them healthy and happy was of utmost importance, because they had been hurt enough, due to the ungodly attitudes of supposedly God-loving witnesses. In short, I regretted ever having been associated with them. Whenever I heard such words from my children, knowing they were words I did not want to hear, I tried everything possible not to show them my sadness, trying to hide my emotions. My emotions were considered non-existent by their mother, under the directive and extreme training she was subjected to. I really felt like human wreckage in an abandoned cave. It had now been proven conclusively that those Jehovah's Witnesses were providing a glimpse of what they were really about. What they attributed to the entire world as being under the leadership of Satan the devil was descriptive of their own true nature, although their followers have been blinded not to realize it. Annette and Birgit were no longer punished for not praying to Jehovah before meals or for small, unthought-of offenses. In other words, they were once again enjoying their childhood, and unfortunately they did not consider not seeing their mother as a major problem, for they often expressed. They frequently referred to her words when she left us. "You are from his seed, and all of you are evil. Stay with the evil man." From time to time they would say that their mother had left them like a heap of junk. Unable to forget the times when their mother punished them, they became very sensitive about the issue. I remember how she shouted at the children during those unforgettable moments in time. "Stay with him and rot in hell." Another characteristic of the witnesses was shifting the blame on those they hated. I wondered what Magda was going to come up with in regard to my sins. For after all, somebody had to be blamed for all the ugly times we had, and that could not be those who shun and destroy people's lives because they were serving their God. Ponder on who, in reality, this God could be. What I am about to say is not bragging, for I do not say things like this easily, since I choose to do the right things and am never conceited about it. If there was not enough food for all of us, I chose not to eat, and only cook for my children. When they felt unwell, I chose to stay up all night to look after them. I did so out of my love for them, although I wondered if they would ever remember it later. As I said before, their well-being was of prime importance to me. They were close friends with some of the children in the neighborhood, and many of them were from school. It was an international community within the neighborhood. Some of them were of Jewish origin, occasionally visiting the girls at our place, and were highly excited about noticing the feature wall I had painted in our lounge room, indicating a few Hebrew words incorporated in the design. They asked if they could come back more often, and their mother was looking for ways to occupy them with nicer things so that they would not seek unnecessary endeavors as the young generally did, going to places where they could get hurt. We planned to have a Sunday morning fun time at our place with other children from the neighborhood, and it was surprising to see how willing the parents were to help their children have some harmless fun. I decided to utilize my hobby in electronics and put the equipment I had previously built to good use by broadcasting their program on FM band. Our Sunday mornings were reserved for singing, dance, sharing jokes, reading poems, and telling stories. Receiving phone calls and greeting cards from local people about how much they enjoyed the programs was delightful. Some cards we received came from the other side of Melbourne, surprising all of us. Other children were now asking if we could play their favorite music on air. It was a great achievement, no matter how small. However, if I added a few more important pieces of equipment to our mini station, thereby strengthening the broadcast, it would require a costly license, and so we left it as it was. "Baby, hang your hair down," or "Sunday morning," almost became the theme songs as the girls formed their own choir and practiced before broadcasting. I recorded some of their programs on professional reel-to-reel tapes. They responded to their listeners' requests incredibly professionally. I have preserved those memorable recordings, which I value a lot, and every time I listen to them, some beautiful memories come alive, helping me to relive those moments. More importantly, they were enjoying their childhood, and I hoped they would fondly remember those fun times. If it encouraged them to overcome their inhibitions and help them with their public performances, radio, theater, or whatever else confidently, I would be very happy, for I always want to see a happier world where no strife exists. I do not think an evil man would wish something like this, as the witnesses expect of all others who do not adhere to their truth. I was happy that my wonderful children chose to stay with me, and so grateful for their presence with all the fun times we shared, along with their childhood nonsense. Some memories constantly creep in, as they are remembered with additional details. For example, shortly before Magda left, I had begun spending much of my time outside due to being forced to feel a complete stranger, unwelcome at home by her and the children under her spell. Maybe I should have spent time with other women, just for companionship. When Magda completely kicked me out, I felt a desperate need to talk to real humans, and, as I said before, enjoyed visiting Andrea, where others shared the house and often had parties. It was almost like an open house. However, she preferred to spend time talking to me. She was progressively interested in spiritual sciences, and I was grateful to her for showing me that the world also contained wonderful people. I remember how one weekend we walked from Chelsea Beach right into the city. It took us nearly 5 hours, talking about all kinds of things, but we also got badly sunburned, and I was the worst affected. That afternoon, we decided to visit the Victorian Spiritualist Union, at her desire. When they had a program which they considered a healing service, one of the ladies wanted to offer me healing for my burns, but when she put her hands on my shoulders, I was in absolute agony. However, in a few days, I got better naturally. What an experience it was! It would be so much better to wear some protective clothing when under the harsh Australian sun. I promised to paint Andrea's portrait one day, but the opportunity never arose, as we had to break the cycle. Same as me discontinuing drawing her portrait when Magda stormed in with her out of the blue outburst. However, we decided to do it on another occasion. At first, I did not desire to start a serious relationship with anybody, whether it was platonic or sexual. It did not matter, but I could not see any harm in it, as long as it was mutually agreed upon. In fact, Andrea could be the one, delicate and wonderful. I imagined that somebody amongst Magda's associates, seeing me with Andrea, would complain about it to her, and all hell would break loose. I was fearful when I met Andrea that it would give Magda the excuse to break away completely from me, for she, as with all other witnesses, considered me as an evildoer, because of being disfellowshipped and shunned. The truth of the matter was that I lived only in fear when with her. Let me tell you a little more of my not-so-fondly remembered memories. Before the final collapse, I knew I was no longer welcome at home, and whenever I was there, it was like entering a giant freezer. Magda was exhibiting signs of extreme jealousy, therefore total insecurity, even long before. Since my presence was causing her so much stress, to create an excuse for her to separate from me would be the right choice, but this decision on my part might have been very naive, when pondering the possible consequences. For well over a year, we did not live like a married couple, rather like total strangers, not sharing the same bed, not eating together, and even the children treated me as if I did not exist, obviously out of fear that if they smiled at me, they would be severely punished. It is very difficult not to recall the times of distrust and emptiness. Magda used to promise the children that she was never going to forget the wrongs they had done, and days later, in a more suitable time, she kept her promise to punish them, constantly telling them that it was because of her endless love. I believe love is forgiving, and this is also supposedly one of Jehovah's Witness teachings. I knew the children were going to be badly affected. Memories of her so-called holidaying, instead staying with one of her dear brothers to collectively spy on me and erroneously accuse me with what they had suspected according to their limited wisdom. I hope that I did not disappoint them. The outcome of this venture, when the girls chose to stay with me, was an excellent one. Living in Elwood, one of the lovely suburbs of Melbourne, near St. Kilda, Annette and Birgit could not be happier, making many friends. However, during our early days, one Friday night, I needed urgent hospital treatment, and it worried me badly when I was delayed getting home to cook for my beloved children. But when I finally arrived, I discovered that my worries had been unnecessary, as they had already eaten. They had made sandwiches and were sleeping in front of the television. I surprised them with something they enjoyed eating, and when they finally went to bed, it was past midnight, but they could sleep a little longer, as it was a weekend. Many months later, after my initial application, we had our very first court hearing. I employed the services of Croxford and Kenna solicitors, and Magda had her own representation. It was my intention that both sides should be responsible for the welfare of our children, but as usual, Magda had to accuse me with devil worship and extramarital affairs. Therefore, she had to break away. She complained that being a man, I could no way in the world look after my children, but who had been looking after them after she left. She further exclaimed that being a God-fearing Jehovah's Witness, she would make a better parent. Interestingly, almost all the entire court was filled with her supporters, Jehovah's Witnesses. The hearing was deferred to another time for a social worker's report to be furnished. They were to visit us, interviewing and assessing the suitability of our dwellings for the children's accommodation. The Jewish girl employed as the court social worker, who visited my home, was extraordinarily happy and positive about what she assessed. She then supposedly went to see Magda. At this time, Magda had kept Claude just for herself, never allowing him to see his father or sisters. For her and her beloved brothers, I was the number one evil. Therefore, worrying about my wicked influences on the children as an atheist scientist, that, as she claimed, was very devastating. When that Jewish girl came to visit us, she noticed the golden words in Hebrew incorporated within the feature wall and was fascinated. When she saw the girls' rooms, I had specially decorated like fairyland scenes, complete with comic book characters, she showed particular interest in the cartoon cat I painted on one of the walls, with a thought bubble containing happy thoughts to remember. She was very impressed. One would naturally assume that her report to the family court about where the girls were living would be a good one. Nonetheless, I had a feeling that she had seen Magda before visiting us, and not afterwards, as I was led to believe, and was convinced that Magda would have the backing of her Jehovah's Witness sisters during such a visit. Several months later, when seeing my solicitor, I was told that my having custody of the children looked slimmer now than ever, but we were going to try everything possible. When at the court and looking into the social worker's reports, the emphasis was given to Magda, who would make a better parent. Although my home was very tidy and a happy place, but as the Jewish girl reported, I could not make a better parent because of the girl's spiritual needs. This made one wonder how any thinking person could be so biased. Initially, I thought the girl was a feminist or Jehovah's Witness supporter. Obviously, she preferred Magda, for she was a woman and a mother, forgetting what she believed in and how the children had been abused and hurt by the supposed disciplinary treatments of their thoroughly dedicated mother. Probably she knew nothing of the real circumstances or supported certain types of abuse as a disciplinary measure. I also believe that Magda had displayed her habitual tantrums on the advice of her faithful brothers and sisters. It indeed surprised me to discover how such a friendly and seemingly sincere social worker could be biased in a feminist way. In questioning this, I am by no means criticizing the feminist movement because I have always been supportive of the democratic rights of all human beings. Obviously, society has not yet overcome the problem of discriminating viewpoints as expressed in regard to gender differences. The report prepared for the family court regarding which one of us was considered more suitable for parenthood was also biased. This report preferred the mother as being a more suitable candidate to look after the children, as I was informed, considering fathers being less favored. But how would the court consider a mother leaving her children behind, for they chose to stay with their father, who did not follow Jehovah's Witness ways? How could a court consider their mother's disciplinary techniques, with all her restrictions and abusive punishments, in a very narrow-minded standpoint? Would such a court consider her inflicting them with pain, breaking wooden spoons on their thighs, as her parental duty? My understanding was that the social worker appointed was supportive of Jehovah's Witnesses, or even discreetly studying the Bible with them. As it was one of the disciplines I acquired during my training, I kept silent when appropriate, and spoke only of the facts in a few short sentences when questioned. Magda, however, kept interrupting and performing her usual tantrums. Frankly, when the time came, and after lengthy cross-examination and further consideration of the facts, taking into account that Claude had been kept away, the mother never making any attempt to see her daughters after leaving her family in haste, all three children's custody was to be granted to me, and their mother would have regular access to the children. I was surprised but happy with the decision. However, I did not want them to grow up without their mother, and it would be wonderful for them to spend some quality time with her. Yet I could not get over the problem they might face by being subjected to Jehovah's Witness indoctrination and her severe disciplinary tendencies. I was concerned that it could lead to problems in the future. The judge spoke of the benefits and why he had made his decision this way, pointing to the fact that by granting custody of the children to their father was going to be more beneficial for their physical and mental health. When Magda and her Jehovah's Witness brothers heard that, she raised her voice, throwing more tantrums and shouting, "No, no, it can't be, it can't be. He is the evil one. He does not believe in God. He is the unfaithful man. I can't be apart from my children, and I am the only parent who can teach them the truth. I am the one who can teach them the wisdom of God." While Magda's accented voice echoed in the court, the Jehovah's Witnesses looked in her direction, anxiously hoping she would speak to the court as she had been coached by them. She certainly tried her best with her theatrics, but performed it badly as she threw herself on the floor. Noticing the real motive behind her acting, the judge asked for a glass of cold water to be offered to her. During that short live play, the cult members spoke as in one choir, obviously prepared for the occasion to assist their beloved sister. "He's a wicked man. He is an evildoer. He is not on the righteous path." One could readily understand what was meant by the righteous path. The judge adjourned the hearing until after lunch. When the court reconvened, he announced that the sole custody of the girls was to be granted to their father, and the mother was to have custody of the boy. There was to be a short trial period, and if the court's decision could not be followed, a new decision would be handed down. Both parties were expected to respect this decision, allowing reasonable periods of access at weekends and holidays. My solicitor was ecstatic about this outcome, asking me if I was happy. I was, but at the same time very sad that the family was broken based on assumptions of cultist thought. As we were leaving the family court precinct in the city, Magda, walking closer to where I was standing with my solicitor, pretending not to see me while talking in her excitable manner to her friends, said, "I have great faith in Jehovah. I know one day he will give them back to me." I felt very strongly that her faithful brothers and sisters were encouraging her, that during the access period, with her daughters, on a weekly basis, it would give her a chance to indoctrinate them according to the principles they promoted. She would strictly advise them not to believe in anything I said. She obviously did not realize that as an intelligent individual, their father was quite capable of discovering things without worrying them in any way. Then again, she never took me seriously, often treating me like a small child, ignoring my educational and cultural background. The only thing she thought I was interested in was electronics, and that I had evil literature, like those textbooks from a number of pioneering psychologists, including Carl Jung and Freud, as well as those relating to human anatomy and the treatment of illnesses. She incessantly felt the need to teach the children about the dangers of associating with evildoers, including me. When talking to others, I preferred to speak of beautiful things about her, but in return she always painted me black. That probably made her feel proud and happy, for she allegedly suffered in the Lord, just to please her brothers, and by preparing the children to hate me with multiple scenarios. She hoped she could convince them to do just that, so that she could triumph in the Lord, as she believed, or better still, was being led to believe. No, my friend, I shall never hate her, because I believe in true love. I believe in true compassion and true forgiveness, and that is because I do not follow any man-made myths and belief systems, following cultist dictums, although Birgit and her offspring describe me as full of hatred without knowing anything, or having deliberately forgotten everything about me, after all that indoctrination since her abduction a long time ago. If you are familiar with the wisdom of Robert G. Ingersoll, you will probably agree with what he expresses here. Happiness is the only good. The time to be happy is now. The place to be happy is here. The way to be happy is to make others so.